Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
Started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology,
Or at least we will, once we get to the middle of this classified program onion.
it raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely. But even if it's new science and not aliens, woo!
It's a very exciting time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey, Scott,
man.
how are you doing?
I'm doing good, buddy.
Yeah.
So this episode is one that has been in the backlog since we started.
Okay.
So back in, I think, 1997, late 90s anyway, this guy named Dan Sherman wrote a book called Above Black, and it purports to be his story of working for a secret NSA program where he was what he calls an intuitive communicator, which really just means psychic communicator with gray aliens. Is a very interesting book. One of the things that I find fascinating about it is there's a few different kind of trajectories for people who write UFO books. Either they are UFO researchers and they're writing books that are kind of compiling stuff together, or they claim to be firsthand witnesses. They're reporting something that happened to them.
Okay.
The firsthand witnesses tend to either write a book, tell their story, and then kind of disappear because the point was for them to tell their story, or they kind of turn into like celebrities in the community. And I think the community as a whole is very suspicious of people like Lou Elizondo, for example, is a great example of someone who I think is telling the truth, but he's definitely on that trajectory of coming out, being very visible, and he's everywhere. He's on every podcast. He's at every convention. He's always there. So when someone like that then writes another book or appears in a movie, there's kind of a feeling in the community like, oh, this person's trying to like milk me for money. They're trying to like use their celebrity in a way that feels kind of distasteful. Dan Sherman did not do that. He wrote a book in 1997. There are a handful of interviews with him.
Yeah.
And he basically dropped off the radar. Like, he didn't need to follow up. He's not continually doing the podcast circuit. So I was a little surprised when the thing that his book is about is this NSA program called Project Preserve Destiny, when suddenly that popped up in the news recently. So this took it from something where I'm like, hey, let's talk about a book I read, to, oh, this is kind of like in the hype cycle all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But it's in the hype cycle in a weird way. So I'm not actually going to talk about this much today, but the short version is an Italian newspaper named L'Espresso wrote an article about President Trump trying to take over special access programs. Special access programs currently are run through the Pentagon, as you'd expect. They're DoD programs. And the claim in this article is he's trying to consolidate special access programs under direct White House control.
Interesting.
That's an interesting claim. I haven't seen a whole lot of follow-up reporting on it, so I didn't think much about it. What's interesting about it is the article explicitly mentions Project Preserve Destiny.
Yeah.
But then it says some unusual things, and I can't tell how much of this is lost in translation, and maybe in both directions, right? The Italian researchers are reading English documents and getting slightly confused, and I'm reading a translation of the Italian document. But they made it sound like Trump is specifically taking the program Project Preserve Destiny, which they seemed to kind of describe as an umbrella UFO program that all the others were nestled under. And they specifically mentioned something from Dan's book, which is this 6-tiered classification system.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very strange because they never mentioned Dan Sherman. They just mentioned Trump is bringing special access programs, including Project Preserve Destiny, which has this 6-layer classification system under the White House. And there's really no more details. And I haven't heard anyone else talking about it. But it was unusual enough that it kind of put Dan Sherman back on my radar. And then while I was prepping for this episode, Dan Sherman popped up with his first new interview in years, a 3.5-hour episode of Jesse Michaels' American Alchemy show.
Wow.
Now, for anybody who's listening, I'm going to save you a little time. If you have read Dan Sherman's book, there is vanishingly little new information in Jesse Michaels' interview. If you have not read the book, right.
He's like not in the industry. Yeah. Okay.
If you have not read the book and you're new and you want a little more information, it's worth listening to because he's a very conversational guy and he comes across very level-headed. One of the things that I really like about Dan is he doesn't do a whole lot of speculation about what things mean. And this leads to some frustrations in the book because there are points where you're like, Jesus God, Dan, ask more questions. But he kind of explicitly calls this out in Jesse Michaels' interview. He's like, look, in the military, we're explicitly taught not to ask questions. Like when you work in classified programs, like you just don't. And on top of that, he said, whenever he did ask questions, a lot of times he just wouldn't get an answer. They would either just ignore the question or tell him that he's not allowed to know that. So it does lead to a frustrating experience of he is only reporting what he firsthand experienced and heard. And you have to kind of like fill in the blanks. Like if they said this, well, that's really interesting. So anyway, I think the story is fascinating. I want to talk about it. We're mostly going to be quoting from the book, although I did pull in a couple of the quotes from the Jesse Michaels interview. Like I said, you know, if you prefer books, read the book. If you prefer the interview, read that. Also, frankly, we're going to be talking about this for like an hour and a half. You can just listen to us.
Good. Yeah.
But yeah, Dan Sherman, Above Black, Project Preserve Destiny. It's one of those stories that's been around for damn near 30 years now. It's fascinating, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it.
Awesome. Do you know, so I tried to look him up. Do you have any idea what he's doing now? Like 30 years is a long time.
I don't. What I know is he had a blog for a long time that had nothing to do with alien stuff. It was entrepreneurialism stuff. So he has a whole life outside of this. And Jesse actually asked him at one point, he's like, why are you coming back and doing this interview now?
Yeah.
And I thought his answer was really interesting. He said, okay, well, I've done a bunch of interviews in the past, but they were all very structured things, right? With prepared question lists, and you show up and, you know, they're going off of a script essentially, and then they edit that down into a tight package for a news program or whatever. And it's fine, but it doesn't let you kind of get to know me. He's like, it's been almost 30 years. I'm getting older, and I was kind of looking for like one updated place that I could point people to that's like, here's my story. And he's like, I've watched your show. I knew that because it's a podcast, it was going to be more conversational and free flowing. And he's right. It was very easy to listen to, albeit a little frustrating since almost entirely it covered the events of the book, which I already had extensive notes on for this episode.
I've been trying to Google him, and I'm just coming up with other Dan or Daniel Shermans, one of whom was at my first college. I was like, oh my God, that would be so interesting if...
He says he moved around a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't know where he grew up, but at one point he refers to himself as an Oregon boy. And one of the interviews with him explicitly says Dan Sherman in Portland, Oregon. So I kind of wonder if he's a local.
Oh my God. That would make so much sense.
Keep Portland weird.
Okay, I'm getting out of that rabbit hole. All right. Yeah, let's talk about Dan Sherman.
Yeah. So he opens his book with something very interesting. Now, we've seen a lot of UFO whistleblowers come out, and I want to note I'm being very careful not to use the term whistleblower with Dan, because as I understand it, calling someone a whistleblower, and I may be wrong about this, but it should explicitly mean they have gone through a whistleblower process, right? So if
Mm,
you're in the military, you're going to the ICIG, you're going to Congress, you're not just writing a book. Writing a book doesn't make you a whistleblower, although in our society we kind of use the term loosey goosey. So
yeah.
is he a whistleblower in the sense of telling us things that are classified? Yes. Is he a whistleblower in the sense of like explicitly like running things up the chain of command to report abuses? No.
Okay. Yeah, that's
So he starts his book where normally these guys will start the book and they'll say, this book went through the DOPSR approval process, which we've
okay.
talked about many
Yeah.
times, but basically means you submit your manuscript to the Pentagon and they come back and redline certain things that are revealing state secrets.
Right.
Or they don't, which is also really interesting if you're talking
Hmm.
about the UFO program and they don't redline it. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, Dan doesn't mention Dopser at all. He has three little quotes here at the start of the book that I think are kind of interesting. He says, first
Okay.
of all, this is an authentic first level account of the existence of aliens. Bold claim.
Okay. Yeah.
It is the story of my personal experiences as an intuitive communicator with the United States Air Force while working for the National Security Agency.
Okay. So I know you kind of briefly mentioned it, but what is an intuitive communicator? What does that mean? Um,
Sure. He never uses the word psychic or psionic, which are the words that
okay.
we hear more often. Psychic is kind of not tainted, but in the same sense they started using UAP instead of UFO because
Yeah.
UFO has cultural connotations. I think psychic is one of those loaded words. But what he's describing is what we all understand as psychic communications,
Okay.
a mental link to another being who is communicating with you non-verbally.
Okay. Cool.
Sherman says, my regular Air Force job was an electronic intelligence specialist. People in this career field are called ELINT specialists or ELINTers. Some of what I did as an ELINTer isn't any more classified than secret level or below. However, some of the things I worked on would be considered in the above top secret realm, and it is in this realm that I start treading on thin ice.
Sorry, the whole time I keep thinking like, is a counterintelligence trap for elinters called an elint trap or something? Like, it's
I mean,
so
it has to
dumb.
be, right?
Right. Okay, anyways. So, okay, what does that mean though exactly?
Sure. In practice, what it means is he never says, in June of
Mm,
1993, I transferred to this Alabama missile base where I worked in this program. He
okay.
refers to PPD for Project Preserve Destiny, base number 1 and base number 2. Now,
Okay.
in the interview with Jesse Michaels, he gets a little coy. He's like, look, my service record is public. Anybody can look it up and infer, you
Yeah.
know, where I was. But basically, he won't tell us the names of the bases he worked at or what years he was there because that might verge into revealing the classified program that he was
Makes
working on.
sense. Yeah.
Uh, which is weird because he does tell us about the alien stuff. So it's like
Yeah, it's
he
so
can tell us
funny.
about the alien stuff, but he has to be real careful telling us about the
But which
mundane,
base he
normal
was
day to
in,
day
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, what's
So,
interesting is
yeah.
what he says about the alien stuff is,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, the information I know relating to Project Preserve Destiny specifically has absolutely no impact on national security.
Yeah.
That's a bold claim, Dan.
Yeah.
Uh, Perhaps if they had been more forthcoming with the truth and made me aware of a greater goal that did impact national security, I would not be coming forward today. But they didn't, so here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I, I'm so your favorite quote seems safe. Like I don't
Yeah.
can you I don't remember what that was from. Was that from Alien or
It's from a Riddick movie.
Oh, okay.
So he can see in the dark. No one else can. There are terrifying monsters in the dark. And somebody, they're pinned down and they ask him, like, is it clear? Can we run across this clearing to the cover? And he looks up. He says, yeah, it looks clear. And someone stands up and runs, and they're immediately torn apart by monsters. It's like, what the hell? I thought you said it was clear. He said, I said it looked clear. They're like, well, how does it look now? And he shrugs. He's like, it looks clear.
Looks clear.
The reason I tell that story all the time is it is the perfect representation of perception checks in D&D. So for any D&D nerds out there, that's my go-to analogy for what it looks like when you fail a perception check. You don't know you failed it.
Seems safe.
Yeah. So yeah, awesome. Sherman says, look, I'm going to tell you about this stuff because as far as I know, it has no impact on national security. That's a big claim. And at no point does he mention, I consulted with a lawyer or I talked to the Pentagon. It appears he just made this decision himself, which, hey, man, more power to you. He never got in trouble for it. He was never arrested. They never tried to stop the book. Nobody got involved in the process. We have seen some lawyers come out and argue that because the legacy UFO crash retrieval programs are allegedly being illegally concealed from Congress, they are therefore not legally classified, which therefore means you can talk about them publicly with no risk, because in court you'd be able to argue that nobody's tested this theory. But that seems to kind of be what Dan's saying here is, look, my actual job had actual classifications on it, and I can't tell you about it. This was just like, don't tell anyone about it. But it's not like, so anyway, it's a weird situation. But I wanted to kind of highlight it because I think it's interesting, the contrast between the kind of standard process we see with whistleblowers now, where like, I went through DOPSR, I talked to lawyers, here's what I'm allowed to say, I can walk right up to this line and not a bit beyond. And here's poor Dan back in 97, like, I don't know, I'm going to tell you about the aliens.
Yeah.
It's probably fine.
It's like all the toys we had when we were kids. It's like, there's no way we would do that now. But, 97 was a different time.
Right? It's wild to me. Like 97, I had just graduated high school. Like, it still breaks my brain a little bit that like, oh, that's nearly 30 years ago now. Like, what? No, what?
In 97, the internet had been like, the internet we knew had been around for like 2 years.
Yeah.
Like,
at one point, he's telling a story to Jesse Michaels about how somebody called him on his cell phone. And Jesse was like, did you recognize the number? And he looks confused. He's like, this was before that.
Yeah. Right. No, I didn't start.
I just got a call.
Yeah.
So I was complaining to Chuck beforehand that I started by rereading the book, and I just highlighted anything I thought I might want to talk about. And then I copy and pasted all those highlights into our like Google Doc. That's kind of our reference. I was like, what have I done? There's so much here. So I had to start cutting mercilessly. So what I'm going to tell you is my kind of narrative here is going to focus on Dan Sherman's introduction to the program and his training to become an intuitive communicator, and then his experiences talking to two particular aliens and what he learned from them, and then how he left the program. There's a lot of other meat left on the bone that might be worth reading the book for. In particular, talking about how he went from base to base, how his clearances moved around. He would regularly talk about like moving to a base and then having 3 months of downtime because he's waiting for his clearances to come through. And in the meantime, nothing is happening with the program.
Yeah.
But the main thing that I want to emphasize is Sherman was in the Air Force for, I think, 12 years. He joined right out of high school. He spent some time doing security work, and then he transferred to become an ELINTer. He had been doing ELINT stuff for a while and then decided to take an ongoing education course. So he signs up for this class that ends up sending him to the NSA in Maryland. And while he's there, he gets inducted into this program. And the next 3 years of his life are all about this and how he kind of like gets indicted into the program. But I'm basically not going to talk at all about his work in the ELINT program. He says very little about it. But the main thing to understand is the Project Preserve Destiny stuff was like a footnote in his career. It was like a thing that happened around and in between all of his regular duties. This was not what he spent most of his time doing, which is a weird spot to be in. You can effectively imagine he has an invisible telephone that nobody else can see, and every now and then he's going to get a call on it and he has to take notes and send it to the NSA.
Sure.
But the rest of the time he's doing normal Air Force NSA stuff. So, like I said, there's lots more details about that in the book. I am glossing over a lot in the interest of kind of keeping our narrative moving forward. So
All right.
let's start with Dan shows up at his hotel. He gets a call from a captain, says, I need you to meet me at this gate. And he takes him into his office in the NSA building. And he sits him down and he says, as you know, you've been sent here to go through an ELINT course, but you will also be going to another school while you're here. I've been in a position of telling people this a few times now, and there's never been a way to put it lightly. Sergeant Sherman, in the summer of 1960, your mother was visited by what the world commonly refers to as aliens. Random tests were being conducted on the general populace at the time to determine compatibility. In a nutshell, you've been given an interesting ability through what we call genetic management.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, he said it. He said the thing.
He said it. Drink.
You need like a Pee-wee's Playhouse, like air horn thing to go on.
Yeah. That is tremendously fortuitous that that he was visited back then and is just now coming to this program.
We'll get to that. Yeah, it's really interesting. But what I love is that Sherman is called into this office. He's told, you're going to take another course. All right. I don't know what or why. Also, your mother was abducted by aliens and you were genetically visually. What? The captain's
One
like,
of these
there's
two.
never an easy way to tell people this.
Can you imagine getting called into your boss's office? Like, there's never an easy way to say this. And you're like, oh, God, I'm getting fired, aren't I?
Yeah, exactly. Like he was saying, he's like, I assumed I was in trouble because sergeants don't get calls from officers. Like, you get a call from another lower ranking officer, like another sergeant telling you to go at this place at this time, like report to Captain White's office at 4 p.m. You don't get a call from the captain himself telling you to meet him. Yeah.
That's so funny.
So White continues. He says, in 1947, the U.S. government made contact with an alien species. 1947, notable date. That's when Roswell happened. He says, today we commonly refer to them as Greys. Because of this contact, we have learned many things. Some of the things we learned were good and some not so good. It's one of those not so good things that has ultimately brought you here, Sergeant Sherman. All that I've been told is that your abilities will be needed in the future when all electromagnetic communications will be rendered useless.
Okay, so they're rounding up telepaths in case there's a cell phone outage, which I get. You got to prepare for that stuff. But it makes me think about every Star Trek episode where they lose ship-wide communications and they have to drag phone lines around. I'm like, how come Star Trek didn't think of that?
What I find fascinating about it is they seem confident this is going to happen, but also that it's far enough away that they start a 30-year genetic breeding program.
Yeah.
Like, there's a timeline here and they're not telling us something, but this ties into something that we hear repeatedly from other experiencers, people who claim to have spoken to aliens, is we regularly are told that the aliens are here from the future or somehow know the future and that there's some big cataclysm coming. So one of the things that we've debated about on this show is why keep this a secret? Maybe you could argue in the 40s, this would cause a much more like cultural devastation, the knowledge that there's alien life. Nowadays, I don't think anyone would be all like, you'd be surprised, but it wouldn't break your worldview to learn that there's an alien species. But if the alien species was like the least interesting thing, and like what they told us is there's going to be this massive cataclysm and the military's been preparing for it for years by doing X, Y, and Z, that makes a little more sense why you might hate it. Like, it's not the aliens, the thing that we need to keep secret.
I mean, maybe. I'm not sure that people would even believe it unless it was on TikTok.
No, for sure. And not then. Yeah.
And that definitely not, you hope.
Yeah. Captain White continues. He says, Project Preserve Destiny started in 1960. It was a genetic management project with the sole purpose of cultivating human offspring so that they would have the ability to communicate with the Greys. Sherman asks a very logical question. How have they been communicating with us since 1947 if you've only recently been able to get people who can communicate with them? And Captain White, for the first time, but not the last time, makes it clear that he only has part of the picture as well. He's briefing Sherman, but he himself is not partial to all of it. And he says, I don't know the answer to that. I can only venture to guess that we have only the ability to communicate with them now through traditional electromagnetic means. I'm not sure. So that would make sense if we can currently talk to them on a radio, but we think all radios are going to fail to work at some point.
Right.
What's the backup plan?
I mean, the backup plan is pantomime and interpretive dance, right?
That's right. We're going to learn from the bees.
Exactly.
White continues with the, you can imagine, fairly upsetting news about him being genetically managed. She says, your mother was initially abducted in 1960 for testing, and then again in 1963 for the actual genetic procedure while you were in the womb. Everyone I've had to tell this has had the same concern at some point in the conversation. Rest assured, you are 100% human. Your conception was as normal as any other person's.
I feel like we've all seen that film.
You are 100% human. Your conception was as normal as any other person's t-shirt is raising a lot of questions answered by the t-shirt. White continues. He says, because intercom abilities cannot be fully utilized biologically until the subject is approximately 25 years or older, we have just recently begun the recruiting and training phase of PPD. Because the selection process in 1960 was based on carefully calculated statistical demographics, they were able to accurately predict that a certain percentage of those offspring would choose the military as a career.
I have a lot of questions about this, but
as well,
my main one is like, hey, aren't they supposed to be from the future? Don't they know who gets into the program? But also, why 25? Like, hey, you're 25 now. You can rent a car and also communicate with aliens. Like, why? Why 25?
I think it was a legal restriction. I think it was a biological one. I like that you're assuming, like, for legal purposes, you can't get your PPD license until you're 25. I assume it's like literally like, yeah, your body is still growing in some way.
Underage telepathy.
The thing that I find fascinating about this is he kind of hand waves away. We did statistical demographics and we're able to predict a certain percentage of the babies we're operating on would grow up to join the military. Well, sure. I missed this implication in the book, but Sherman explicitly says it in the interview with Jesse Michaels. He's like, I assume they were mostly targeting based on race and class. My family was very poor. Like, who ends up joining the military statistically, it's not rich white people. No. So anyway, that was interesting.
But it also implies that, 50% of those babies that were operated on didn't go into the military, but were still operated on.
Some percentage. Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
Yeah. What is the acceptable attrition ratio for this? Like, I'm
yeah.
fascinated. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, White goes on, and this is where we get into the like 6 layers of security I mentioned earlier. He said, you're
Okay.
already aware of the Alien Project. There are
Okay.
other programs that you'll become involved with that serve as cover or black missions. The cover missions are designed to do just that, cover the existence of the alien program.
I like the idea of him like, I always knew this laundromat was a front. I just assumed it was a front for the mafia. The guy saying, the mafia is a front for aliens. Like,
Okay, I wasn't going to mention this because it's a
yeah.
big detour from what we're talking about today,
I mean,
but there's a whole side thing in the book about how during his training, he's always taken to and from the school in this very particular van, and he spots that van on the road one day and he follows it, and it pulls into this company that does noise cancellation technology. And
okay.
he's like, what does noise cancellation have to do with the alien stuff? And like, he kind of speculates that maybe this is, like he's an ELIT specialist. The NSA is dealing with signals. If they're
Yeah.
like piggybacking psychic comms on low frequency bandwidths, maybe noise, but like it felt like so speculative, and it was all
Yeah.
based on I saw a van that went to a building. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. Like, it's weirdly, I'm totally willing to roll with the idea that there's a secret program where we genetically engineered babies, but the idea that this van was like the key, I couldn't follow him. It's too
I
much
like
for
that.
me.
It's too much. Yeah.
You got to have a line somewhere.
Yeah. Exactly.
Sherman asks a very logical question at this point again. Why hide the alien program from the public to begin with? And
Yeah.
White says, my guess is that it's not so much the specific knowledge that aliens exist that's the problem. It's more like the information we have gained from communicating them that would create havoc if released.
I feel like the alien part would cause havoc too. Like, I don't know. At least
We
some.
saw Carl Nell talking about this in his catastrophic disclosure thing, and
Yeah.
he talked about the idea that there's like a cascading effect here. The revelation that there are other life forms out there is itself not hugely disruptive. It's fascinating. It may cause some havoc, but on its own, it doesn't impact your day-to-day life much. But how we learned about that and what they're doing here and whether
Right.
that has been concealed from you, and if so, why, like all of the questions that follow from this initial revelation are the
Yeah.
ones that are actually destabilizing to culture.
Yeah.
One of the things they've talked about is this idea that they've been here for a long time
Sure.
interacting with us. Tom DeLonge has made the claim that they are little g gods. A lot of our mythology and stories throughout history of interacting with gods were actually us interacting with them. Well, you can imagine how that information might be rather destabilizing to certain portions of the population. So,
Maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
White goes
Yeah.
on, he says, PPD had its beginnings in 1960, and this is, he says this so casually, I love it. The personnel in charge of the project at the time were trying to figure out a better way to keep the program from the eyes of the public, from the eyes of the increasingly aware public. Brute force and manipulation was intimidating, but not an effective long-term solution.
Yeah.
Meaning,
I
we
agree.
tried brute force and intimidation. And he explicitly calls this out. He's like, you would tell people in the program that if they spoke about this publicly, they or their family members or people they know would suffer the consequences, like an
Right. That
explicit threat.
definitely doesn't
But,
happen anymore.
well, I think it does happen, but he also points out that that wasn't enough. People would
Yeah.
still take files home to prove it because the knowledge was so mind blowing that like
Mm-hmm.
people would kind of risk anything. So they said, in order to protect any future information leaks, again, implying there were information leaks, they instituted what they call the onion effect.
So prior to 1960, chopping onions didn't cause tears. It was actually part of the genetic management program to obscure people's eyes from the truth. Onions are the front.
The onion's a metaphor
Sorry.
in this case, Chuck, but I appreciate you going literal with that.
I mean, you kind of have to sometimes.
I'm going to kind of like rapid fire tell this part because this kind of matches what we have learned so far about classification levels. So White says on the outside of the military onion, the side everyone can see, is the unclassified layer. The next layer is for official use only. If several of these bits of information were to be pieced together, that could be as damaging as the release of a higher level of classified information. The next layer is secret. The unauthorized release of secret information and above has the potential of causing serious damage to national security. The next layer is top secret. Within the top secret category, there are code words that compartmentalize the release of information even further. So that translates to special access programs.
Or bigot lists.
And the next layer, black missions, are what the alien projects are effectively hidden behind. The existence of black missions is only known by a handful of congressmen and the president. These black missions are the last line of defense for the alien projects.
Yeah, so far sounds exactly like we've heard from SAPs and unacknowledged SAPs. So.
Yeah, he uses different terms, so I wonder if some of the terms have changed over time. Like, as I understand, it's what he described as secret is what is now top secret. What he described as top secret is what is secure compartmented information. So TSSCI.
SCI.
And then what he describes as black missions is what we know as unacknowledged or waived unacknowledged special programs. So normal special access programs still have to be in the budget. They still have to exist. And anybody who's looking can see there's a program by this name. The unacknowledged ones are the ones where only the president and the Gang of Eight are allowed to know about it.
Yeah. It's got secret inflation going on here.
Yeah. So far, this all matches.
Yeah.
I've never heard the onion metaphor before, but it makes perfect sense, and it aligns with what we have heard about the process here.
Sure.
But White continued, and he said, the center of the onion always contains the alien project, which we call level 1 or gray missions. So black and then gray. Not even the commander of a site is normally aware of the alien project residing beneath his nose. Wherever an alien project is located, there must be a black mission to cover its existence from prying eyes. If a nosy congressman starts looking where he has no need to know, he can be briefed on the black mission, be made to feel important, and thereby squelching any further digging. It's an extremely effective method of hiding alien missions, and it's the reason they have been hidden so effectively for so long.
I feel like putting another level in place just to like prevent people from digging like doesn't actually stop the dig, but whatever. I like the idea that underneath the gray missions is like a series of other colors until you get to like plaid or rainbow or something.
My God, they've gone plaid.
Exactly.
All right. So up next, we have White actually going to his PPD school where he will be taught how to be an intuitive communicator.
Wait, White or Sherman?
Captain White is introducing the class to Dan Sherman, the guy who will be attending.
Got it. Okay.
So White says, you will be going through a highly specialized school while you're here. This school is designed to teach you how to recognize and uncover your IC abilities. By the way, confusingly, IC widely means
used
intelligence community anytime we're talking about it. But here they're usually referring to intuitive communicators. So,
of course,
to uncover your intuitive communicator abilities. You will see another student during your classroom time, as there are two of you here at present. Neither of you may speak to each other. Your transportation to and from the school will be provided. You'll meet a van outside your hotel after your normal ELINT classes break for the day. You will be expected to be down at the van exactly 45 minutes from the time you arrive back at your room from your ELINT class.
Okay, wait. So meet a van outside the so they're staying at the hotel. But wait, no, are the ELINT classes at the hotel?
No. So he's in Maryland, and there are many NSA buildings and facilities. He's taking an ELINT class at one of those, and this is a normal above the board thing. That's like a normal 8-hour day. After his day ends at the ELINT class, he comes back to the hotel that he's staying at. And then 45 minutes later, they're going to pick him up and take him to his second class, where for 3 to 4 hours, he will be training to be an intuitive communicator in a different secret facility that the van he goes is blacked out windows. So he has no idea where they actually take him. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Did he talk about like why speaking to each other was so problematic? And whether they can use telepathy to talk to each other? Like if they do that, is that okay?
Those are good questions. So first of all, he doesn't say why you're not allowed to talk, but I've cut a lot of material, as I said. And every time he talks to anybody in this program, they overemphasize again and again, you are not allowed to talk to anyone about Project Preserve Destiny. In fact, they go so far as normally when you go to a new base, you get your orders and you report to the commanding officer. But the PPD commander is secret from the director of the Black Project at the base that he's reporting to. So he has to report to a base, report to his normal Black Project chain of command, and then he's not allowed to just go find the Project Preserve Destiny guy. Everything has to be a manual handoff. Your former contact will introduce you to your new contact, which leads to weird scenarios like he's working overseas, and like 3 months later, he's at his new base back in the States or whatever. And his commander from the overseas base walks into the room to introduce him to someone. Like, so there's a lot of like compartmentalization. Yes, there will be another person in the room. Yes, you're both taking this class. Don't talk to each other. Like it's that compartmented.
Weird. Okay.
Your second question, why can't they use telepathy to talk to each other? That's a great question. Again, Sherman never uses the word telepathy, and he only does the communication in certain contexts when he's sitting in front of a computer and like he's on shift. And later he says when he left the program, he has received no further comms and he's unable to like access this ability on his own. Yeah. Is that because there's just no one's talking to him, or is it because it only worked in context? But certainly he never developed telepathy as just an ability he could use with anyone. It was more about he will be able to receive a signal in his brain and type it up into a report for the NSA.
Okay. Interesting.
White says, when you get down here, come straight to this table and take 2 of these pills using this water. They are to facilitate your abilities. They're quite harmless. Then sit down at your workstation, put on these headphones, and await further instructions from your instructor.
Do you think it was the pills or the water that made him psychic?
So Sherman actually addressed this. Because I think a lot of people thought, based on the way he wrote it in the book, that the pills were what made him psychic. But he says, sometimes I would forget to take it. When he was taking his class, he always took it because he walks into this room and there's nothing there but 2 terminals and a table with pills. But when he's on base at his normal job, his pills are like in a lockbox nearby him. So most of the time he would take them, but sometimes he'd forget. And he said, so it wasn't like take the pill, you could do it. Don't take the pill, you couldn't do it. Was it an enhancement? Was it a placebo effect? Like, it's completely unclear. They also changed the dosage on him at one point, and he's like, are the pills different now? Am I different now? Like, no information is given.
Interesting.
Once again, my these pills are harmless shirt is raising a lot of questions answered by my shirt. Sherman says, and we're going to talk quite a bit about the school, but I'm going to try to move through it pretty quickly. Basically, he does a really good job of describing how they taught him to unlock this ability in his brain. I think the
Mm-hmm.
process is kind of fascinating, but it's also kind of repetitive. So I'll be kind of
Yeah.
breezing forward, but please feel free to interrupt with questions or something.
Yeah.
He said school for PPD consisted of listening to one tone and watching a box on my computer screen that had a perfect sine wave running through it. So like above and below the
Mm-hmm.
line. There were 10 boxes like this one, and I was told to listen to the tone and try to repeat it by mentally humming it, not verbally, only mentally. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I was to watch the first box for movement of the sine wave, and the goal was to see the sine wave flatten completely. Other than the headphones, I had no connection to the computer on which I was working. I had a hard time believing I was going to be able to manipulate the sine wave with only my mind.
Yeah, I can see why he'd be a little skeptical.
Yeah. He says the process was slow, arduous, and extremely boring. It wasn't until my third day that I saw progress. Imagine mentally humming a note for 3 to 4 hours straight for 3 days. It was borderline torture. When I
Mm-hmm.
finally saw progress, I nearly shot out of my seat and danced around the room. I was sitting there looking at my screen as usual, feeling defeat as I had been for the past 2 days, when something clicked in my mind, and just at that moment, the sine wave flickered.
How can he be certain that it wasn't affected by something else, or that someone didn't, change the sine wave? It's on a computer. Someone could remote in.
I mean, perfectly bluntly, he can't be.
Yeah.
And Michaels asks a few questions like this during the interview, including like, how do you know you were talking to aliens? Like, you were
Yeah.
receiving psychic communications, but you're inferring that it was from an alien. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. I can tell you that
Yeah.
their communications felt weird, but
Hmm.
at the end of the day, I
It's
cannot
telepathy.
tell you for sure. I never saw an alien.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
similarly here, was the military just fucking with him? Maybe, but why? And he
I mean,
does
that
say
was
he
the
felt
thing to
this
do.
click in his
Yeah.
head, and then it responded on screen after doing nothing for 3 days. So I'm
Yeah.
not trying to dismiss your question. It's a good
Yeah.
question, but in context, he
Yeah.
comes to the conclusion.
Yeah.
Sherman says, my instructor started the next lesson by playing another tone for me to mentally hum. It was a different tone. I could tell that because I had become so familiar with the first tone that I
Yeah,
had
I bet.
started to dream about it.
Mm-hmm.
After I flattened my second line, the third one came much more easily, and soon I had flattened all 10 lines with the help of 10 different tones.
I wonder why they only did 10. Like, if we're doing equal temperament, there should have been 13 tones? 12 semitones in an octave.
Yeah, it's interesting. He never tries to describe what the notes were.
Yeah.
He's clearly not like musically inclined. But just to kind of tip my hat here a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
later on, as his training continues, there are no more tones anymore. The tones were just a training mechanism to get his brain to think about this.
Okay.
And it gets weird too. But, okay. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
The next big challenge was flattening 2 lines at the same time.
Yeah.
This exercise proved extremely difficult. It took me a full week. By the time I was able to do this, my will to continue with PPD school had been almost broken once again. But by the end of my 3rd week of PPD school, I had flattened all 10 lines at the same time.
Oh, God. So this guy is sleep deprived for 3 weeks in a row, not able to speak with anyone for like half of his day, doing a thing that's crazy monotonous. I feel like that's just gonna break your brain alone. Like,
I hear what you're
that's
saying.
crazy.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
quite as bad as you're describing. So he is talking to people because he's going to his normal classes.
Sure, his other class.
And he
right.
is getting a full night of sleep, right? So he's going to a normal 8-hour class. Presumably that's out by 5 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
He has about an hour. So he
Hour
reports
drive.
to PPD class at 6. Then he has a 3 to 4 hour class. He's out at 10.
10 o'clock. Yeah.
He's working all day. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. He gets up, goes to school, and we all know what it's like to go to school. It is mentally exhausting. I'm sure he was absolutely exhausted, but I
Yeah.
don't think it's fair to describe him as sleep deprived or that he was
Mm.
unable to talk to people.
Yeah.
What he did say is it was very frustrating to be in this room and not
Yeah.
be able to talk to the other person. And importantly, there was no bathroom. He's like, we were
Oh.
allowed to take breaks, like a 10-minute break every hour, but there wasn't anything you could do on your break. There was nothing to
Yeah.
read. You're not allowed to bring anything in. It's just stand up and stretch.
Hmm.
He said the bathroom thing was almost a problem a couple of times. And he
Yeah.
specifically joked, he's like, this is a young man's game. He's like, I learned like when I was back at my hotel room, like I'm on the toilet until like the
Yeah.
minute the van comes because I did not want to have an accident happen. He's like,
Yeah.
I could not do this now. Now I'd be like, no, I'm sorry. You to
Yeah.
provide a bathroom facility.
I would have just peed on the walls, like whatever.
Right? Yeah. Hey, maybe I'm not cut out for this program.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, not to downplay how rigorous or intense this time is, but I don't think it's quite as bad as you
Yeah.
got the impression. Um,
Okay.
Sherman says the goal during my 4th week was to practice and master flattening lines in different combinations at once. By this time, I could feel movement in the boxes. The audio tones, which were so crucial in the early stages, had ceased. The tones were only used so that my human mind could relate to something tangible to lead me to uncover what my mind could do naturally once I had discovered and practiced it. So
Hmm.
he compares this to like chords, right?
Mm-hmm.
So task 1, flatten boxes 1 through 10, one at a time.
Yeah.
Task 2, flatten all of them at the same time. Task 3,
Right.
flatten 1, 3, and 5 at the same time.
Right.
And like where he compares this to strength training at some point.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I don't think I was doing anything that was directly related to comms. It was about building this muscle in my mind so that I could eventually be able to do this.
Yeah, totally.
He said, I began to assign meaning to the flattening of lines during my 5th week. In my interface box, a string of numbers would scroll through, and I could see, as well as sense, my sine wave boxes light up corresponding to each number. So at this point, they're literally teaching him the language of intuitive communications. When you see, feel, hear, whatever, these sine waves, that means 1. When you see these ones, it's 2. And I didn't include the quote here, but I saw that Chuck was confused in the show notes, so I'm just explaining a little more.
Yeah,
He
thank you.
explicitly says, he's like, numbers were easy because I have 10 boxes. So, you know, like the first box wiggles, that's 1. The second box wiggles, that's 2. And then eventually it was, 1 and 2 is 12, but it could also be 21. So there was like a subtle distinction between how it happened. And then eventually they start introducing words and letters and things like that. But basically, he does 4 weeks of class on totally abstract sine waves. And then in week 5, it starts turning into, this has meaning. These are numbers and letters and stuff.
Interesting. Yeah.
During the 6th week, we moved on to concepts. I was shown some pictures, and sine wave boxes would simply begin lighting up in quick sequences, with each at a different degree of flattening. That flattening sequence represented the picture shown at the time. In one day, we went from still pictures to videos, with my mind grasping the line flattening combinations as quickly as they came.
I mean, it's a cool idea. I find it, yeah, whatever. You know, I'm feeling skeptical. It does sound a little bit like a neural net, and how those kind of work, but
I think that's totally fair. I mean, what we're dealing with is a different language center in his brain being brought online. And what he describes is the first steps were arduous, but as we continued, it started to become more, well, intuitive. That's why it's called intuitive. Like his brain just starts getting it. He talked a little bit about what the videos and images he showed were. He said the videos I was watching had no audio. They were random recordings of people walking down the street, nature scenes, people working, military aircraft flying like helicopters and fixed wing. There was an overwhelming amount of military images, which I took as a sign that I would be reporting primarily military-oriented comms.
Yeah, sure.
Makes sense, right? We're
Yeah.
preparing for a communications apocalypse. What
Yeah.
are the things the military would want to be able to get reports about?
Military. Yeah.
But he goes on, he says, I think it was their way of testing my ability to convey different types of messages. It could have been they were testing my ability to describe what was going on in a military type of functioning or the mechanical. Did I describe, when shown a rocket or something, was it white, or would I describe the length of it, or what would I actually describe when given that message? He said, I'm sure everyone else who is an intuitive communicator was getting the same types of things so that we could see who is better at what.
Is there any description of like how uh of like him failing?
Yes,
Like did
actually.
it flash red or something?
He
Okay.
said that occasionally the instructor would ask him to repeat a particular sequence. So that implies the instructor has a way to check his accuracy. I didn't include that quote because in my mind, it seemed clear to me that the instructor can see his screen. So the
Sure.
instructor can see these sine waves flattened, and that means he did it right. And, oh, he flattened the wrong sine wave, so tell him. But it is, I think the underlying message here is you're hitting the nail on the head when you make the analogy to LLM training. It's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing. Here's a huge data set. Here's a million pictures of bees. Here's a
Mm-hmm.
million pictures of dogs. And when we come out of this, you should be able to tell the difference between a dog and a bee when I show you one in the future. That seems
Right.
very similar to what's happening. They're doing pattern matching and confirming that he's recognizing the patterns.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he
And the
even describes later when he's actually talking to the aliens, he believed most of the comms he was receiving were still training. It was still them checking the accuracy. Okay, now that we're in the real world and Gray is actually talking to you telepathically, why do you need to take that message to the NSA? It's presumably
Sure.
because they're checking for accuracy.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So the reason I was asking is like the analogy you had with machine learning or LLMs. Well, machine learning in particular, you need to have negative cases. And
Sure.
if you don't have a fitness function to say whether it worked or
Mm.
not, like you should be failing 95% of the or 99% of the time.
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, carry on.
And I will say he doesn't talk about that a lot, other than the one
Hmm.
reference to the instructor telling him to do something again. But also, I think that kind of fits. The lesson that Sherman expresses most often is they didn't tell him anything more than they absolutely had to. It was
Yeah.
very much a black box. So I believe you and agree with you that there's probably a more complicated testing and verification apparatus, but it was definitely not exposed to him. How do you verify psychic comms? And they even reference later, one of his commanders mentions, like, this is all new to us. Like, if it
Yeah.
seems like unstructured, it's because we're kind of building this plane as we fly it. So, maybe some of the things you're mentioning where, oh, it doesn't sound like they have the right controls in place. Maybe that's a lesson they were learning the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I included a longer quote here because you and I are tech nerds, and this
Yeah.
touches on something that I think is really fascinating.
Yeah.
How does the reporting mechanism actually work?
Yeah.
So
Bring it on.
during training, he's just flattening sine waves. But in the real
Yeah.
world, his job is to receive a message and submit it to the NSA. How does he do that?
Okay.
He said, the last thing I learned was how to open a window to document the results of my future communications, referred to as comms. In order to document the comm I would be receiving from my alien contact, I had to open an interface window in the background of my computer screen. Remember, this is early 90s, so think like Windows 95 era GUIs, right? I had to open an interface window in the background of my computer screen. The day I was to learn this, I came to school to find a mouse set up near my computer terminal. In order to open the window, I had to click the far right button of my mouse and press the F10 key while the arrow was resting on the background screen of the computer. A
Obviously.
dialog box would appear with several choices. My instructor went on to say that at each place I would be stationed, I would have the same PPD code name designated in the computer system. My code name was Staunch 118. So after bringing up the dialog box, I would highlight Staunch 118 in the menu and type in my password. My password would change at each base I was given. At a separate window would appear with a blank screen, and I was told that I would never see anything contained in this screen, not even what I was typing. This was for security purposes in case someone were to see what I was typing by accident.
Yeah, obviously. Because something is really happening. So if he's able to flatten sine waves, presumably, I don't know if it's in a GUI or if it's on an oscilloscope, he's clearly affecting things around him, right?
Something. Yeah.
Why does he need a mouse? If he can
It's a very
already
good
control
question.
the computer with his
Yeah.
mind, like, why not control
Well,
it?
can he control the computer with his mind, or is the
I have no
computer
idea.
somehow reading what he's doing with his mind? I think you're hitting the nail on the head. And I will go back to a story that you have told me, which is here in the
Uh-oh.
States, you look at construction projects and it's like a lot of high tech equipment and a small number of highly trained construction workers. In China, it'll just be a million dudes. Like if
Yeah.
they need to move a pallet of bricks down the street, instead of renting a truck, they'll just get a line of dudes and pass the bricks
Yep.
because manual labor is much cheaper than
Way
renting
cheaper.
equipment.
Hmm.
Um, I think we're probably looking at a similar thing. You're
Hmm.
right that clearly he's doing something that could affect the computer. And as computer nerds, we're like, well, why not build the interface so he can just put the thing in and the computer records it? But I think
Right.
their take on this is probably we have an alien speaking psychic language, and we need someone at the NSA to get a text file with what that message is.
Yeah.
You're the translator. Your job is to output a text file for the
Yeah.
NSA. We don't care about efficiency. We care that someone can translate this to this.
Also, can we talk about like the keyboard like why right click and F10 of all the things?
I'm so fascinated by that. Okay, so he describes that he's working on Spark workstations, which are
Oh,
in the mid 90s pretty fancy, right? But
yeah.
they're also standardized. These aren't like custom PPD workstations. He describes going to his jobs doing ELINT stuff, and these were the workstations they're working on. Now, you and I have both done tech and IT stuff.
Yeah. And I've actually worked
This
on Spark stations.
program that he's describing is either written into the OS or is a program that is bundled with the OS, which means someone in IT is either receiving, hey, this is the custom NSA PPD build of the OS, or
Yeah.
make sure you install this custom Black Project software. But
Right.
it's also built in such a way that if some random person sits down at this workstation, they're not likely to trigger it. So you have to do an unusual key combination that most people
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't do, which then brings up a like authentication prompt, right? Name and password, and then a black box. And the black
Mm-hmm.
box is really interesting because he describes at his other bases, he's always sitting around other people and he's doing his day job when suddenly he gets a comm and he has to like pull this up and type it. But there may be people walking past his desk. At his first duty assignment, he's literally for 12 hours a day sitting shoulder to shoulder with another guy. And he has to
Yeah.
be able to do this secretly. So just from a techie perspective, I was fascinated by this. And I think all of your
Yeah.
questions about like how the psychic stuff are totally valid. But like the nerd in me was like, who wrote this program? Like he mentions at one point going into the NSA building and going to these like specific facilities that are very clearly locked down and wondering like, how are the janitors? You're like, what there are there are people who need to be in this environment that are not cleared, presumably, unless you're reading all the janitors into the project. So anyway,
yeah.
this is a total detour. It doesn't really
Yeah.
affect it. All that our listeners need to know is everywhere he goes, his workstation will have this custom software that lets him report his comms to the NSA. But I couldn't help geeking out about it because as a tech nerd, I'm like, I have so many questions about this program.
Yeah. Dude, and so sometime remind me, I'll tell you all about like working on an actual sun station because they're wild. But it's totally different topic. So
all right. So we've dorked around long enough talking about his training.
Right.
Like you, I have a lot of questions about this. I'm willing to kind of gloss over it because I don't think Sherman himself understands it. It's one of those things where, on the one hand, I'm really glad that he doesn't speculate, that he doesn't like try to fill in the blanks. He just reports what he knows as a fact. But it's frustrating when you're like, this raises so many more questions than it answers. But let's accept for the moment, let's put a pin in. He goes to this ELINT class, and in his evenings, he's also attending his intuitive communicator class, where after 6 weeks or so, he has learned how to translate concepts and words and letters and be able to report them to the NSA via this like secretive program that'll be installed on all of his workstations.
Presumably.
So he finishes his ELINT class and he is eventually assigned to a new black program, which contains Project Preserve Destiny nestled inside it, like the Onion effect. And he has this whole story about showing up on base and waiting for his clearances and being like personally introduced by Captain White to his new program director, Captain Stanley, all of that. I glossed over most of it because it doesn't really affect the meat of our story, which is he now starts actually receiving comms. But I will include this one bit. So this is his first time working in the actual program, meeting a director that's actually in charge of it. So Captain Stanley, when he's introducing him, says, "As you probably know by now, you are here to do more than one job. You are the first IC that I have ever worked with. You and the other IC-capable personnel represent the culmination of 30 years of wait and see. You're part of the first wave of what will be a small but steady stream of IC-capable and trained personnel. For most of us, this is all new territory we're charting, so if it seems like something isn't as organized as you would expect, it's because we're flying blind sometimes."
Yeah. I still find it extremely difficult to believe that they would wait 30 years with no indication whatsoever that it's working.
I don't think he actually said it, but my read on the situation is they didn't just figure out how to genetically engineer babies to be psychic. The aliens did that. So I think this is something where the aliens are like, hey, in 50 years, I don't know, there'll be this kind of communications apocalypse. But if we start today, we can start this little breeding program and give you in 30 years or so soldiers who will have the ability to communicate with us when the EM apocalypse or whatever it is happens, you know. But yes, I totally agree with you. I have no experience with extremely long-term wait and see type programs in the military.
Yeah.
How common is this? Is it really uncommon? Is this yet another weird thing about the above black world? Or is this actually more common than I think? You know, maybe DARPA has, 50-year initiatives all the time, and I just don't know.
Yeah.
It's very strange, though.
Yeah.
So Sherman gets his new job. He gets his new workstation. Like I said, he's working shoulder to shoulder with another guy. So there's some funny stories about him, like getting a comm and having to like juggle a couple things at once and hope that his like desk partner doesn't notice that he's typing into a black box. But Sherman said, "I had just started to power up my equipment for my shift when I intuitively received the message, 'Prepare for information string.' I was startled, so I audibly
Yeah.
said, wait, and also instinctively sent back a comm saying, wait. And he actually laughs. He's like, his desk mate is like, wait for what? He's like, oh, nothing. Don't worry about it. So he sends back a comm saying, wait. He said, they seem to have listened since I didn't receive anything until my computer was up. Waiting for my computer to boot was the absolute longest 3 minutes of my entire life.
Oh my God. Isn't it always? Computers are the worst. Like,
I just love this idea of like, he's been in training for 6 weeks. It has now been some number of months. And he's been told you're going to be talking to aliens. And all of a sudden, there's an alien in his head and his computer is booting. Like, oh, God. But as usual, this kind of funny story, I think, masks something that's much more interesting. He mentions in the book that he only ever received comms when he was on duty. It never happened when he was like at home or had a day off, or I don't know how often the military gets days off, but you know what I mean? Like, it was only when he was not only at work, but like presumably has access to his workstation. But they don't appear to be like looking at him or reading his mind because they didn't know that his computer wasn't booted up.
Oh,
so
yeah.
presumably some alien is told communicator Dan Sherman will be available starting at 9 a.m. So the guy's like, all right, hey, Dan, I've got a message. Oh, wait.
Hang on, I'm late. Yeah.
So as usual, there's some like reading between the lines inference of what this means that I find a little fascinating.
That is interesting.
Sherman says, my comms were very uneventful and mundane. And I think he's kind of trying to address the idea that any of us reading the book are like, oh my God, how exciting. You're talking to an alien. And he's like, not really. I had no idea the meaning of what I was typing. A comm would begin with the same sequence of numbers that differentiated very little. And he explains it's like the 3 numbers that represent him, 118, and then like a 5-digit code that made him think of a zip code, even though it wasn't, so like there's this like preamble he describes. There would be timed pauses between each phrase or expression, and then another string of numbers would follow. There was no rhyme or reason to the comms most of the time. It became a very boring task to receive these comms and type them into this blank window. It certainly wasn't very challenging, and I lost all interest in it simply because it was only a one-way communication for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. So I don't know. For some reason, this was like confusing to me the first time I read it. But is it really just a stream of numbers?
Yes.
Like, why did they teach him concepts and words and?
No, that comes up later. But at the beginning, it's just streams of numbers.
Okay.
And presumably these numbers are coded or, there's some meaning to the structure of it that someone could infer. He mentioned that sometimes he would recognize a string of numbers as like a lat long, but he's just guessing at what they mean. Like, he doesn't actually know. There's no like titles or imagery coming through. Later, there is imagery and stuff coming through, but at this point, it's all just these number things. And he implies, I think he mentions this later, that he thinks at this point, he's still in the training and accuracy verification phase, where they're like, send the following messages to Dan, and let's see how accurately he transcribes them.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I also wanted to mention, he says it's a one-way communication. What he means is it's like picking up the phone and someone talking at you. Yeah. You can talk to them, but they're not really listening. They're not calling to hear you. He was able to say things like, hold on, wait, repeat that last bit, but it wasn't a conversation. It was a message he was receiving.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now we start getting to the fun part, the alien part. Sherman says, I took the liberty of naming the gray contact I communicated with Spock because I perceived a great deal of logical structure in his communications. It felt a bit sad to come up with such a deliciously ironic name as Spock and have no opportunity to share the humor of it with anyone.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good thing you wrote a book. Does he talk about how he knew it was the same alien?
Oh God, Chuck, that is such a good question, and I cut all that stuff on purpose
Yeah,
because it's
okay.
long and complicated. But
Yeah,
the simple analogy is later he's talking to a different alien. Someone asks, "How did you know it was a different alien?" He's like, "In the same way that if I'm talking to you on the phone and suddenly someone else is talking, I can tell it's someone different. Their voice is
yeah,
different.
yeah, okay.
The voice in my head is different." Um, Presumably, in the same way, the voice is the same, so that's how he
Yeah.
knows it's the same alien. There's a much more complicated metaphor of it being a tapestry and him describing colors and weave and literally like seeing the number in the upper right and knowing
Hmm.
the voice was coming from this part of his brain. But
Hmm.
I didn't really understand that stuff. It all seems a little hand wavy. The short version is he is receiving messages from what he is able to tell is the same individual, and that individual has kind of a flavor, and that
Sure.
flavor is kind of like rigorous, by the book, logical. So he
Okay.
jokingly nicknames this guy
Totem
Spock.
Spock. Yeah, that's funny.
He says, about 3 months before I was leaving this base, and he explains like he wasn't being reassigned. Literally, the base he was at was shutting down. So
Hmm.
like,
Okay.
he knows like my transfer date is coming. He says, during a comm, I suddenly tripped and stepped up in my comm level. Spock immediately picked up on my accidental mental leap and met me on this other level. I was startled because I didn't even know this other level existed before that. Spock immediately asked if I had intentionally changed planes. I answered no and told him that I didn't even know this plane existed. Spock immediately signed off, and I was left wondering what had just happened. I knew from Spock's response that this event was totally unexpected.
Huh. This sounds like astral projection or something.
Mm.
Did he give any info about what it was like to converse on different planes or to move or I don't know?
He does talk about it a little bit. And the main thing he
Yeah.
talks about it is how difficult it is to put into words. And he's like,
Yeah.
I'm giving you an impression because I'm using language that we have for verbal communication, which is
Hmm.
not what was happening here.
Yeah.
He says, I have no choice but to write the contents of the comms with my alien contacts in a conversational format, like two humans talking. The actual comms were much more rich in texture and informational in content, but in ways I am unable to convey to the reader on paper. I
Hmm.
use the word plane in this explanation because I can't think of another alternative to how Spock referred to it. If Spock and I had been communicating verbally, I would have asked what was meant by that word. But when you intuitively communicate, the rules aren't the same. You understand things that otherwise make no sense in linguistic terms. And I think
Yeah.
this gets back to the idea that they didn't teach him words. He wasn't literally learning another language like French. They
Yeah.
taught him concepts. So when the alien thinks lemon, he doesn't
Yeah.
receive the English language word lemon. He receives the concept that his brain understands is lemon, and he uses the English word for it.
Right.
Um, but yeah, definitely there's a weirdness to this, and I want to emphasize that this is something we hear from people who claim to have had telepathic communication with aliens. Is it is not a like recreation of verbal
Sure. Why
communication
would you?
just in your brain. It's like they often use the term download. You just
Hmm. Hmm.
receive information. It's like a whole packet of information is suddenly in your head. And
Yeah.
that communicates everything that they would have said out loud, but as complete coherent concepts, which you may not have the ability to understand. They often describe getting information about like how time works and how space
Hmm.
travel works that makes no sense to them. They received
Yeah.
the information and they just don't have the language to coherently express the idea that made perfect sense to them at the time, but they can do nothing with now.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. That's interesting.
Yeah. Sherman says, so remember, he
Yeah.
accidentally steps up to this plane, and Spock's
Yeah.
like, did you mean to come here? He says, no. And Spock's like, end comms.
Yeah.
Like, it hangs up on him,
I'm
right?
out.
He says, Sherman says, although I had been attempting to break through again at the close of every comm with Spock, I was finally successful 2 months later. Spock immediately picked up on what I had just done, and again he asked if this was something I had done intentionally. This time I answered yes. Spock replied that it was an interesting turn of events. Dan asks him, like, is it okay for us to talk? And Spock says, there is no harm in communicating on this plane, nonchalantly. How come you're calming so candidly on this plane and you don't during our normal comms? I asked. You have never given me a reason, he replied.
Oh, that's funny. Like, even aliens kind of say, oh, you never asked.
Right? How
Yeah.
frustrating would that be? Like, you mean we could have been talking this whole time? You thought I wasn't interested?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Sherman says, my impression of Spock was one of being official, with no room for emotion. Even now, as we communicated on this other plane, I still felt a sense of rigidity. Do you have feelings like humans? I asked bluntly. We are quite alike in our emotional makeup, 118. We react to our surroundings just as you do, but are much less impacted by what we sense. In the absence of markedly increased stimuli, emotion is not readily useful.
So he really was a Vulcan.
Right? I will say, there is a long-running conspiracy theory that the NSA, the CIA, whatever, has been slowly seeding alien concepts out into popular culture.
Sure.
And that things like the Federation and the Prime Directive and Vulcans are not ideas that came from nowhere.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Sherman said, I asked, why did you think it was unintentional when I first commed with you on this plane? And, Spock replied, until now, we thought it was impossible for a water human to sustain communication on this plane. But we are continually being surprised by other intuitive communicators' abilities as well.
A water human? As opposed to...
Yeah. Sherman says, he has a little footnote there. Water human is the closest I can come to an accurate translation of how Spock referred to humans. Other alternatives might be water vessel or water entity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we are mostly water, but it makes me wonder, if are they not? What are they made of if not mostly water?
It's a great question, right?
Yeah.
Like chlorophyll, like silicon,
Silicon?
what's going on here? But it reminds me again of a Star Trek episode where they're talking to an alien who refers to humans as ugly bags of mostly water.
Very apt.
Sherman asks, am I supposed to report our comms while on this other plane? To my surprise, Spock said, no, that's not necessary. Our communications are only being monitored through your reports so as to calculate an accuracy factor. Your communicating on this plane was never anticipated, and therefore will never be known unless you discuss it with your chain of command.
All right, dope. Let's tell scary stories and sit around a fire and make s'mores and tell me about your dreams.
My impression of this is he works for this incredibly rigid hierarchy in the military. Sure. And the aliens are just like, fucking whatever. Like, do I need to report this to my boss? Like, man, who gives a shit?
I don't know.
Like, is your boss gonna know?
They can't read this. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about science. Water bag. Sherman said, I was thinking that I sensed an underlying current of scientific interest when Spock broke through my thoughts and said, comms will cease, and signed off. I never communicated with Spock again, but my communications took on a whole new life at Project Preserve Destiny Base number 2.
Yeah, I bet they did.
So he's at his first base. He starts receiving comms from gray aliens, but they're boring. It's boring to the point where this ceases to be interesting to him. The initial fascination of something happening, a secret that only you know, becomes just mundane and uninteresting because it's just a repetitive thing and you don't actually get to talk to the aliens. And even if you could, you can't tell anybody about what you learned. And then accidentally, he slips into free communication mode and finds out that the aliens will talk with him, but now he's moved to a new base. So once again, he deals with, I think he said 3 months before his clearances arrived. So he effectively can't work. When he eventually starts working, he's working in a bigger room. There's more computers. It's more like an open office plan. Because he said his first base was like 25 to 50 people. And this base was a much bigger one. So there's like other branches of service in here too, not just Air Force and NSA people. But it also meant that while there's nobody sitting next to him all day, anybody could walk by his desk at any time. So in a weird way, he had to be even more guarded with like getting the window up than he would in the other office, because random coworkers might ask questions like, what's that black box on your screen?
Yeah, right. Like, why do you always minimize things when I walk up? What are you watching?
Right? How suspicious is that? Yeah. So Sherman says, the first comm I received at PPD Base number 2, I realized that I was not comming with the same gray contact as I was before. It seemed Spock had been replaced by a new gray contact that I nicknamed Bones. He jokes about like just continuing with the Star Trek theme, but he does say later, anyway, he says, I could sense the change from the texture of the message. Spock was definitely more rigid, with his comms being more punctuated and tighter around the edges. Bones appeared to be more human than Spock, in that his emotions were more readily apparent.
Interesting. So the rigidity is not like a feature of Gray's. It's just that guy.
Right? Which is really interesting, because he kind of assumed it was when he's talking to Spock. Oh, maybe this is just how they are. And that's why he asked if they have feelings. But now he's talking to this other guy who's a little loosey-gooseier. So, again, right? He's been waiting months. He finally receives a comm. He's like, I went to the other plane as soon as he was finished with the preamble. And I'm cutting a whole bunch here. But basically, the whole conversation that he had with Spock about, like, did you intend to come here? And is it okay for us to talk here? And why are you being so casual talking to me here when you can't on the other one? He gets almost the exact same answers. So basically the same thing. It's not a problem for us to talk here, whatever. But he says to Bones, I was able to find this plane while comming with my previous PPD contact, but I was unable to further explore communicating on this plane because I moved shortly thereafter. There was so much I wanted to ask him. I thought I could ask you now that you're my contact. Would that be okay? I asked.
Nice.
We have no preferences regarding communicating on this level. There is no harm in this communication, he said, responding the same way Spock had months earlier.
I just imagine him like, all right, neat. Do you have belly buttons? And then the other alien just like kind of sighs and ceases communication. Oh, damn it.
I'm hanging up.
This fucking guy.
Oh, here we fucking go.
Again.
Always the dick question.
I always want to know about
it's the first thing any human wants to know.
Tell me about your probe. Okay.
Right? Sherman says, over the course of 10 months at PPD Base number 2, I received over 75 comms from Bones. That's interesting because it's the first time he's given us any sense of how regular communications are. So 10 months, that's less than a year. That means he's getting about 7 a month, which is
one every 4 days,
1 to 2 a week. So it's not like an incredibly frequent thing. It's like, as you know, to get back to what you were saying earlier, like, what is his day-to-day life like? His day-to-day life is an ELINT officer.
Right.
It's just that occasionally he gets these weird psychic phone calls and has to type it into the secret text communication NSA message bot on his computer. And while that happens, he takes advantage to ask the alien questions. Now, he does say that some questions would not get an answer, or they would just end the comms. It's just like, I'm done. But he was able to get some stuff. And he's he now goes into a big list of things he learned. He said, I want to stress this is not a like chronological list. This is
Sure.
my memory of the things I learned. And he says explicitly, I don't profess to have learned a great deal of earth-shattering revelations. I was able to glean some information, but I did not learn as much as I would have liked.
Yeah. So is this like he only had a moment to ask and they only answered
That's the
one
impression
question?
I get, is that
Okay.
imagine that you get a phone call from someone who has to read you a, encryption key. And while you have them on the phone, you chat about a few things. But
Sure.
presumably, Bones has other things to do, and so does he. So I get
Yeah.
the impression it was like a few minutes of conversation every
Yeah.
time, but who
Hmm.
knows? The other thing is, he's just makes it clear that a lot of times he didn't understand their answers. Like, they
Mm.
would answer, but it didn't mean anything to him. Um, but I kind of set these up in order of like talking about the aliens and then talking about alien related things. So
Hmm.
like you said, belly buttons.
Yeah.
The first thing he asks, do you eliminate waste like we do?
Yeah.
I could swear that if they were capable of laughter, I could hear it in the background. Yes, we have that need as well, but not in the same manner.
We're a little bit more like wombats. Our poop is cubic, but it is still poop.
I mean, to get more accurate, we've heard a number of reports that they excrete waste as ammonia through their
Ah, right.
skin.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting, right? Dan doesn't say how it was different. The
Hmm.
answer he got was, yeah, we do, but it's
Yeah.
different.
Come on, Dan. Everybody poops.
Right? Yeah. I like the idea that they kind of laughed, like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we excrete waste. We're biological too.
Yep.
Um, I had asked at one time if they have two sexes like we do. The answer was yes. It seems they procreate as well, but not in the same manner. I didn't go any further in my questioning, and he didn't volunteer any more information.
Oh, why would you stop? Like you already broached the topic. Just dig in, man.
I, I can only assume that you feel dumb, right? If
Oh,
you
sure.
ask, like, do you guys have two genders like we do? And they're like, yeah, we
Yeah.
reproduce like you do, but a little differently. He didn't volunteer any more information. Like,
Hmm.
maybe that's a sign that further questioning on this direction. Like,
What?
I would be really timid of not wanting to push my contact too far if he has a
Mm.
tendency to hang up on me already.
Yeah, I
Um,
suppose. I suppose.
he said, their lifespan is similar to ours, but I was not able to understand the time measurements he was using. I
Hmm.
learned that time, as we know it, does not have the same meaning for them. They still age as we do, but they're not bound by the physics of time as we currently are.
Currently, um, yeah, I don't even know what to do with that. Got
Exactly.
loads of
And I think
questions.
same thing with Dan, right? Like,
Yeah.
and he kind of mentions the idea that time comes up a couple times. He has a couple more questions here that follow up on that. But
Okay.
this was one of the things where the guy would give him information. He just kind of didn't understand it. It's like our frame of reference isn't able to perceive things the way they are or whatever,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, he said, when he answered this question, I did not understand half of what he was telling me, and I couldn't translate it if I did. What little I got from the conversation was that they somehow travel using time and electromagnetic energy as a source of propulsion. Their
Hmm.
means of travel across vast distances is heavily dependent upon the manipulation of time, but not as we perceive it.
Yeah. You'd written in a kind of like side note here, Alcubierre Drive, and I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe. I guess
I
that's like
mentioned that,
bending space time. Yeah.
yeah, in the interview with Jesse Michaels, he was careful not to say that the
Hmm.
alien said Alcubierre Drive, but he said
Of course.
he became aware of the concept of an Alcubierre Drive later, and that
Hmm.
kind of most closely aligned
Oh,
with the
okay.
sense that he got from him. This idea that you project a void in front of you and you're falling into it and you're continually projecting it.
Hmm.
But as we know, manipulating space means manipulating time. So I can imagine a world where the alien gave him a very matter of fact, like, yeah, we surf
Yeah.
the waves of time through space. The guy's like,
Yeah,
what the
right.
fuck does that mean? Like, don't worry about it,
Yeah.
Dan.
Well, and let's be honest,
Let's go
did
back to
Bones
talking about
really
poop.
have any idea? Like, can you tell me how an engine works? Like, barely.
That's a good question, right? Like, we tend to talk about alien species like they're monoliths,
Right.
but in practice, we don't know how individual are they. You know, like,
Yeah.
are
Right.
they like us, where knowledge is wildly inconsistent and some people specialize in some things? Are they more of a hive mind? Like, we just don't know that, and it's all
Yeah.
kind of assumptions.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, that's a great point. Um, Thinking about traveling using time, he said, I asked if they can travel through time.
Hmm.
And he said, you can't really go backwards and forwards in time because time is a relative thing. So if you're going back, then what are you coming back from? There's no solid moment in time that you can measure from to go back and forth from. But he said you can go around time. And I really didn't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I So the thing that struck me about this is I wonder if aliens would consider when we travel, are we also using time, but like really
Right.
slowly?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's the old joke of like, yeah, I can time travel. I proceed forward through time in a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He asked about other species. He said, according to Bones, there is a vast number of other intelligences in the universe. And I got the feeling when I asked this that he felt it was a dumb question.
I mean, yeah, it kind of is.
This
There's
is the
so many
only time when he
galaxies.
said that, right? Like,
Yeah.
most of the time he says the alien gave him an answer.
Yeah.
There's 2 times when he got kind of a flavored answer. This one, he's like, that's kind of a dumb question. What,
Yeah.
you think in a universe this size is just the 2 of us?
Yeah. How
But
could
the
there
other
not
one
be?
was, do you poop? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
we're getting a little more metaphysical here.
Okay.
He asked about souls. He said, at the time I was very religious. And Bones' answer was, he said that any entity that realizes its own existence has intellect and therefore must have a soul. We have been created from the same oneness, my interpretation, and out of that creation came intellect and non-intellect.
Just let me tell you about our savior. Oh no.
The reason I included this, I
Mhm.
have been threatening to do an episode on the raw material, the law of one
Yeah.
stuff for a long time, but this is another common thread we hear from past life regression, alien contacts, things like that, is
Buddhists.
this idea that there is only one consciousness and it has incarnated in limited ways to experience things and know itself. This is kind of a common thing. So what I see here is just like kind of a non-answer. Like, yeah, anything that's self-aware has a soul. But going a little further, he ties it into this idea of law of one raw material stuff that we see kind of across the board. And Dan doesn't mention any of that. He just reports this phrase, oneness. So anyway,
Yeah.
I found that fascinating.
Yeah, that is interesting.
He asked how long they've been here. And Bones said they've been visiting us for a very long time. I really don't understand the terms he was using for time when describing to me how long they've been here, but I remember thinking it must have been a very long time. He said they had visited cultures from time to time throughout our history. They had revealed themselves on many occasions in the past and even contributed to certain societies and their technologies, but none of the direct contacts they've initiated turned out well.
Yeah, that's why we have the Prime Directive. Come on.
So again, this ties back to the raw law of one thing, that a heavy narrative in that is the idea that there are non-human civilizations that have been interacting with us for our entire history, and that there were earlier periods where they were directly interfacing with people. This ties back to Tom DeLonge's idea of little g gods, but also it ties into Atlantis narratives and stuff like that. And I totally, if there's any of you out there that just rolled your eyes when I said Atlantis, I don't blame you. That's totally fine. I'm not asking you to believe this, but the thing that I always say, right? Like, what am I looking for? I'm not necessarily looking to judge if any individual story is accurate or not, because frankly, I don't have a way to do. What I'm looking for is through lines, commonalities. What are the things I'm hearing a bunch of different people talking about in different ways? And this idea of long-term contact between non-human intelligence and human civilization is one of those things we hear over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Now we get to something really interesting.
Yeah.
He asked about energy sources, and he said Bones didn't mention their energy source, but did speak about our energy sources.
Interesting.
He told me that our sun was very unique, and that someday we could utilize the same methods they use, but on a smaller scale.
Sure.
Okay. So far, so interesting. Sounds like fusion. I'm on board with fusion. That's great. But then he got into a little bit more of almost a religious vibe. He said they respected our sun more than you would think, more of a reverence feeling, talking about how we don't really understand the value of our sun and that we will at some point eventually understand. And once again, this ties into the raw material where they talk about the idea that our solar system, centered on the sun, is itself self-aware, and that it's going through phases of growth, and that this kind of like apocalypse or change or, you know, whatever that is coming is not a, you know, biblical style, the sinners will be purged and everything. It's more, the sun is ready to change and grow. And whether we're ready or not, this shit is happening. We're going to the next plane. And either you're ready to follow or you're not, and you'll incarnate somewhere else. Again, the details don't matter, but this is kind of a common idea that you hear, this idea that the sun isn't just a ball of fusion in space. Like, we tend to think of it from a very mechanistic standpoint, and kind of a common idea that we hear from extraterrestrials and other places is this idea that there's more to it than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a very, it is actually kind of a weird star.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So, like, G-type main sequence stars are like 7.5%. That's the estimate. But the thing is, most of them have, like, are just wild, like coronal mass ejections all over the place. And so chill stars that are G-type main sequence actually really, like, we haven't found that many, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I try not to read too much into like synchronicities like this, but it's like that thing of when you find out that like the moon is perfectly positioned to block out the sun. Like, if it was any closer, it would block out the sun quite readily. If it was any further away, you would never get a full lunar eclipse. It is that the exact right orbital plane to give us a perfect lunar eclipse. How common is that? I don't know. Is there like a mathematical reason why that would happen? But it seems weird, you know, the fact that we are in the Goldilocks zone where we're just the right distance from the sun. You know, what are the odds of that happening? I mean, on the one hand, the odds are 100% it happens. But on the other hand, how common is that in other solar systems? And when we're looking elsewhere, so far, that doesn't seem super common. We're finding planets everywhere, but not necessarily a lot of like rocky-bodied, medium-sized planets in the habitable zone.
Right.
What does that mean? I don't know, but, you know.
Yeah. If you ever want, we can break out the orrery, and I'll explain why that why the eclipse thing actually isn't that interesting.
Okay,
but
that's totally fair. I can accept that.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been talking for a long time. Dan Sherman gets inadvertently sucked into a program that he apparently was genetically engineered to join. He
Yeah.
learns how to use his ability to receive messages from extraterrestrials. He is reporting those comms to the NSA, and he is secretly back channeling with his contact
Mm-hmm.
and asking them weird, embarrassing questions about biology and time travel.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Now,
Like
you
you
may
do.
be wondering, at some point, Dan Sherman left this program. And
Yeah.
knowing what we know about um, Grush and Brown and Borland and all these other guys, it doesn't sound like it's that easy to leave these classified
Right.
programs, and certainly not to leave and talk about it. Um,
Right.
so, how did we end up at a point where Dan Sherman leaves the military and then
Right.
writes a tell all book about his alien contacts? He says, towards the end of my stay with this project, I started to receive stuff that indicates it was about abductions.
Hmm.
These comms would
Hmm.
begin like other comms, but there would be other items in the comm body, including such things as potentiality for recall, residual pain level, nerve response, body normalization, and other more obscure things I can't recall because they made no sense. The subject field would always contain an 11-digit number, and the field after that was obviously the date of the abduction, with the date varying between 1 to 3 days prior to the date of the report. And the last field was obviously the latitude and longitude of the abduction.
It's weird. It's, it's like they're transmitting JSON or something.
The thing that I think is interesting about this is we've talked for a while that I mean, it's in the intro to our show, right? Like, if this is real, what about that?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so for a long time, I was in the camp of UFOs might be real, but they're probably not non-human. And when I got to the point where I'm prepared to accept that there are non-human UFOs, good Lord, the cascade of questions that falls out of that, because one of the big things in the experiencer community is this idea of abduction, right? Like Communion is effectively a horror novel
Hmm.
about waking up in the middle of the night and little gray beings taking you against your will and doing things to you. And it's terrifying. And if you accept the first part of this story, that he's talking to gray aliens and that the gray aliens have worked with us on genetic manipulation, well, suddenly we're into abduction narratives. And
Right. Yeah.
by definition, this is happening not against your will, but without your permission, right? Like you
Certainly
don't
without consent. Yeah.
consent to being abducted by the government and having your baby operated on.
Yep.
Um,
Probably not.
so understandably, Sherman starts feeling uncomfortable. He says, I started to question why this was happening. I was tired of being supposedly so important because of my abilities, and yet treated like an underling with no need to know. I
Yep.
think I would not have begun to feel this way if I had somehow been made a part of the whole process, if I would have been made aware of the reasons for everything, why the abduction data, why had everything been passed in code until now? And that's where I started to feel like an accessory to the crime, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. That's why it was probably encrypted the first time around. But
Well, and we don't know, right? Like, were the first messages encrypted, or
or were
were
they
they just
calibration?
nonsense training data meant to verify his accuracy?
Right.
Regardless, at some point, what he is receiving changes from apparently abstract, unknowable numbers to pretty clearly painting a picture of this is a report of a real alien abduction that happened. Um,
Yeah.
Sherman
Right.
said, I sent an email to my PPD commander and asked if there was any way that I could receive an early out discharge.
Hmm.
Within the hour, I received an email back summarily denying my request and saying that since I had been officially indoctrinated into Project Preserve Destiny, it would be impossible for me to get out, even when my current enlistment came to an end.
Wow. That sucks. I mean, at least they're being honest about it, but still, like, what are you gonna do with that?
Kinda. But yeah, it sucks to find out that you're being held captive. in this program, right? And
yeah.
we get a corollary to this in the last episode when we were talking about Dylan Borland, and like administrative terrorism. That's more about the people who are threatening to leave and you make their lives hell. But clearly what we're seeing is that if these programs exist the way that they are described, they treat the people in the programs as security risks at best,
Right.
and
Yeah.
tools at worst, who have no value on their own. Dan Sherman is an intuitive communicator. We put a lot of work into, genetically manipulating you and kind of monitoring you as you grew up and encouraging you to join the Air Force. We're sure as shit not going to let you just quit now, buddy.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, it's a bad situation to find yourself in. But as we know, Sherman did get out. In the book, he's vague about this. He says, there is a mechanism by which you can get a discharge that I think anyone can figure out, but I'm not going to mention so I don't legally implicate myself. In the interview, he's more straightforward. He said, at the time, don't ask, don't tell policy was in place, and I was bisexual. So
Sure.
I wrote a letter to the commander that was not in charge of me from the PPD perspective. This was just my regular chain of command. The chain of command here was crucial because if PPD had their way, they had final say on that, then I would not have gotten out. They would have just tossed the letter. But I purposely went through another chain of command who did not have the option of doing anything like that.
Yeah, that's super funny. Super smart.
Yeah. He said, immediately upon turning in the paperwork that eventually led to my discharge, I stopped receiving comms, and I was never contacted by anyone in the PPD chain of command again.
Oh, that's weird.
Right? And Jesse Michaels asks, he's like, okay, well, they gave you this ability.
Yeah.
Have you tried to develop your comms and speak to them after leaving? And Sherman said, oh, I've tried. Nothing. It's like it was closed off.
That's crazy. So it only works when you're on a military base, deprived of human contact. Well, I guess not really. Forced to type out long strings of meaningless numbers 8 hours a day. And then you stop having these visions. Like, weird.
I think
that's not very...
You're being a little bit jokey, but I think there's room for questioning this, right? Like, what is the mechanism by which he no longer receives comms?
Yeah.
And one way of viewing it is, there was something special about the computer, or there was something special about the pills. But I think what's more likely is, imagine that you upgraded your computer to have an Ethernet card in it. If you connect the Ethernet wire to that Ethernet port, your computer can receive messages. If you disconnect the wire, the mechanism is still there. It just can't receive any messages because there's nothing coming in. I think it's the same thing. It's the biological equivalent of, they opened this communications port in his brain, but unless anybody's talking to him, he won't receive any communications. Right. And he's tried to reach out, but presumably the people he's reaching out to, like Spock and Bones, are told only talk to the people on this list at certain times, or something like that. So obviously we're reading between the lines a lot. And once again, one of the things I appreciate about Sherman is he doesn't try to speculate about the mechanism by which he can no longer do comms. He's just reporting the plain fact. When I was in the project, I would receive comms once or twice a week while I was at my day job on shift at my terminal. I never received comms at any other time, and when I left the project, it ceased.
Yeah, that is super interesting.
Yeah.
What do you take on it?
So you can see why I'm interested in this story, right? Yeah. So I read this book years ago, and I remember liking it, but not being particularly convinced by it. And part of that is Dan Sherman doesn't put a lot of work into convincing you. He's just reporting what his experience was. It's up to you whether you find it credible or believable. One of the things we talk about a lot when UFO whistleblowers and witnesses come out is like, what else do we know about them? Can we verify anything else about their story? Obviously, we cannot verify whether Dan Sherman was in an unacknowledged program or whether aliens were talking to him through his brain. We
Right.
don't know if he was talking to someone through his brain. We don't know that for sure what he was talking to were gray aliens.
Right.
But every other part of his story does line up. His service record has been checked out. He, went to the trainings he said he did. He was in the
Hmm.
places he said he was. They've been able to work out which bases he was assigned to. Um,
Yeah.
the facilities he was assigned to were, as you can guess, NSA communications facilities that
Makes
specialized in
sense.
like large low frequency antennas, so
Yeah.
like
Interesting.
there's
Oh, now that's
nothing.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I will say is there's nothing out here that I'd say discredits him,
Hmm.
but there's also nothing that confirms the story is true. So we can't come out of this and go, oh yeah, it definitely happened. But you look for those kind of red flags that make you
Yeah.
suspicious of something. We talked about Matthew Brown, like having this really interesting story, and then he kind of looked like he cracked, and he posted
Yeah.
that
Right.
weird Twitter message full of like arcane lore and weird analogies.
Hmm.
What does that mean for his credibility? I don't know. It doesn't make me more
Yeah.
confident in him. But
Yeah.
Dan Sherman had a story in 1997. He has told the same story since.
Yeah.
He's never tried to capitalize on it in any way other than releasing a book.
Yeah.
Um, I find it credible. And I find that a lot of what is written in here aligns with what we hear from other whistleblowers.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is when you go look for references to Dan Sherman or Project Preserve Destiny in the UFO community, what you find is a lot of people who are like, my contact in the intelligence community told me to read Dan Sherman's book as a good explanation of how these programs are hidden. So at the
Mm.
very least, there
Hmm.
seems to be an understanding that his onion metaphor is fairly accurate of if
Yeah.
there is a program, this is how you would conceal it. Um, the actual information he received from the aliens,
Yeah.
like I said, I find it interesting that some of
Yeah.
it correlates with like law of one stuff. It also correlates kind of nicely with what the like EBO scientist that we talked about a while back mentioned, where
Hmm.
he read documents about what we have learned from the gray aliens, and it,
Right.
loosely lines up. I don't know, man. Like I said, I
Yeah.
don't fault anybody for not seeing it. What I found interesting was the idea that it popped up in the news recently in that
Yeah.
weird story about Trump trying to centralize special access programs. I
Yeah.
cannot imagine why they would specifically call out Project Preserve Destiny.
Yeah. It's
If
weird.
I had to put money on it, I don't think it's an error in translation, but I think it's maybe an error in understanding on their side, because if you ignore the fact that they used the Project Preserve Destiny name and kind of specifically mentioned the 6-layer onion thing, there's
Hmm.
nothing in it that references Dan Sherman. They just talk about special access programs and UAP programs and the idea that they're secreted within others. So once
Hmm.
again, maybe this Italian reporter, someone told him go read this book to understand the nesting, and this Italian
Mm.
reporter took that to mean this is the name of the. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like I said, if I had to come down on where do I feel about this, I feel I feel pretty good about Dan Sherman and his story. I think it largely tracks with what we're hearing from other whistleblowers. And I find everything he learned from the aliens and the idea of intuitive
Me too.
communication
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'd put a lot of money on the particular things he learned.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
think?
Makes sense. I. Yeah. I don't know. It
You seem
seems
less convinced, and that's fine.
I feel way less convinced in this one, just
Sure.
because the things we were doing with psychology experimentation
Mm-hmm.
at that time were
Sure.
absolutely bonkers,
Yeah.
especially in the military. So
Yeah.
I don't know, just it feels like one of those things that could be a misunderstanding of what was happening, or I don't know, they're
Jesse
feeding him.
Michaels makes a metaphor, an analogy, when he asks Dan, he's like, could this be a disinformation program? And one of the things he says is, you tell the story of like the alien program being hidden inside the black program. But what if it's the other way around? Like, what if the alien program is the disinfo? He's like, imagine we had a program that had developed anti-gravity, and you seed some information in the program that we received this from aliens. And then that's like putting dye into a water source to see if it leaks. Like, you see where that dye pops up, and that you know that they're connected. Like, if you put out the story that this anti-gravity came from this alien vehicle, and suddenly you hear Russians saying that we've got anti-gravity we got from an alien vehicle, you know you got a leak.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Anyway, it's an interesting story. It's an interesting book.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know what to make of the fact that it's been popping up again lately.
Yeah.
I don't know how to prepare for our future electromagnet blackout. Like,
Yeah.
you want to know how many skills I have in a world where there are no computers, Chuck?
0. Same as me.
There's not going to be a lot of people wanting to give me a paycheck. Let me tell you that.
No. I've got exactly like one papaya tree that's really growing. So, we're both kind of effed.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our Discord and social media accounts.
And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime, or grab some shirts, shirts at veryexcitingtime.com/merch.
You always trip over this line. I don't know what
I don't know
is.
what,
like,
I say very exciting time too many times in a row. It just like,
that makes sense. It starts to be meaningless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.